live it. I'd like to, if I could, I was going to ask Ted to talk about relationships, but
It talked too long.
yeah, it took his time, and we. I'd like to ask Ted about the hurdles and failures, because, I mean, that's the world we live in. You're going to have some failures, and how do you bounce back? And Ted's gone through his especially in the beginning, he's gone through significant challenges that he's had to overcome, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Ted. And then we're going to get to some Q&A immediately, so if you want to rev it up and start thinking about what you'd ask.
So I was asked at the dinner a little earlier, well, you've been at Morgan Stanley 28 years. I guess you found the right job from day one, and must have worked out really well for you. And I just kind of looked and said, yeah, right, it wasn't even close in the beginning. First of all, I applied for the wrong job. I started in the stock market when I was 13 years old from a game that a teacher brought into our classroom that taught us a lot about the stock market. And I decided that this was something I wanted to get into, and I started asking my parents how I could do this in real life. And both of my parents were educators, so they sent me to the library. We didn't have the internet back then. But they sent me to the library every weekend, and I would look for companies. I would look up different stocks, different companies that I wanted to invest money in. And I had a bunch of different odd jobs as a kid. I had I delivered 2 competing newspapers. I had a lawn cutting business, and I had like a bunch of kids in the neighborhood working for me with signed contracts and the whole deal. So the money I had saved up at 13, I chose the first stock we went into. It was a company called Resorts International before they had legalized gambling in Atlantic City. Made a ton of money, decided, okay, I know what it is that I want to do for a living. And so I went to Rutgers, majored in economics and finance. I got hired March of my senior year by what was then Dean Witter, now Morgan Stanley. I applied for a job as a retail stockbroker. Well, my impression was that I was going to be on a trading desk somewhere, and there'd be a ticker tape in the background, and they were going to give me a bunch of clients, and I just had to manage the portfolio. So my first day on the job, I'm really excited, and I walk in, and there's a guy sitting next to me, and he's cold calling, people like making 200, 300 phone calls, actually more than that, phone calls a day, cold calling, trying to sell Ginnie Mae's, and I'm going, I don't want to be a salesman. This is definitely not what I wanted to do. But anyway, so my first year in the business, I was making about $18,000 a year. Thought that I was on top of the world. I picked up a couple of decent clients and thought it was going to last forever, very similar to a lot of the athletes that I currently work with. The lifestyle of Wall Street was different, and then the market crashed in 1987. The market crashed. I realized I had overspent because I had this mentor who, sometimes you got to be careful when you choose your mentors. I had this mentor that had convinced me that the way to be successful in your business is to start off in debt. So at 21 years old, the first thing I did was I went out and bought a house because that was his advice. And I went out and bought the house, and as soon as I bought the house, he said, well, what kind of car do you drive? And I had this station wagon. I don't know if you guys have ever seen what a station wagon looks like, but it was about the size of a Navigator now, with wood panels on the side and a seat that faced backwards, and it's a pretty ugly car. But anyway, I had the station wagon, and he said, your clients will never take you seriously if you're driving a station wagon, so you need to go out and get a new car. So went out and bought my first brand new car, and then he told me, well, now that you're starting to make a little bit of money, go out and get yourself a couple nice suits. So I was highly leveraged, and October 19th, 1987, the market collapses. Not only did the market collapse, but at the same time, my father, who went from being a high school dropout at the age of 15, ultimately went back to school at 27, got his GED, and ultimately ended up running the entire New Jersey school system, was accused publicly of stealing money. And while the whole case was thrown out, that doesn't make the front page of the newspapers. But what did make the front page of the newspapers was that Octavius Reed mismanages funds, which I happen to be Octavius Reed III. And what do I do for a living? So it was a very difficult start to my career. So in my 5th year in the business, I was producing $62,000 a year in revenue for the firm. What that means is that we typically get 30% of the revenues that we keep at the starting level. So you guys can do the math in here. I'm sure I'm in a business school. But on 3 days before Christmas, this was my 5th year in the business. 3 days before Christmas, I go to my mailbox at work, and there's a memo in there that says that the firm is going to change their payout structure. All financial advisors who have been with the firm for 5 years or more, if you're not producing $120,000 in revenue, your payout will immediately drop January 1st to 20%. Once again, you guys do the math. I was doing $62,000 gross. I owned a house, a brand new car, and had just bought a couple of nice suits. So, I got very depressed at that point. I went home, and as I'm going home, just to make matters worse, I walk up to my condo unit, and there's a red sticker on my front door that was from the bank. And so I decided, okay, this is probably the worst day. It can't get any worse than this. So I go to the bank, to the ATM, to try to get some money out, because I figured I at least need to go get a cup of coffee. And the ATM won't give me my money because they don't release anything less than $10. So I couldn't get my money out the ATM. So I go to Cherry Hill Mall. I had money that I used to keep. I always had this thing about never spending your change. And so I always had a cup full of change. And I go to Cherry Hill Mall, and there's a Cinnabon in there, and I get a cup of coffee and a Cinnabon. And I'm looking around. As you remember, this was the 90s. And so back in those days, people were wearing these big gold earrings and long leather jackets. And, I don't know if you remember the group Salt and Pepper, but that's kind of what they... And I'm looking at them, and they're all carrying bags because they just went shopping for Christmas. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, I went to college for 4 years. I've been a stockbroker for 5 years. And I can't afford a cup of coffee and a Cinnabon. What's wrong with this picture? And so for the next several days, I just went totally underground. I unplugged my radio, my television. I just totally lost communication with anybody. And I sat in front of a legal pad for the next 3 days. And all I did was write down all of the people that I knew that were successful and the people that I knew that were failures. And what were the attributes of each of those people. And I decided, I went back into my office. I went back to my manager day after Christmas, and I said, listen, I need you to work out a deal with me. If you're willing to raise my draw, which meant give me a guaranteed salary, back to $18,000, give me an extra $500 a month, I will double my revenues next year. And I handed him a piece of paper, and he said, what's that? I said, it's my letter of resignation dated a year from today. And if you're willing to make this deal with me, I will double my revenues by the end of next year. If not, that letter's yours. And the following year, I doubled my revenues, and I came back to him right after Christmas again, and I handed him another envelope. And he looks at me like I'm crazy. He said, what is that? I said, I'm going to do it again. And I did it 3 years in a row that I doubled my revenues, and never looked back since.